Have you ever noticed that when you want a little more independence from your parents, it may end up coming at the cost of them leaving in favor of another kid? Well, that's what Clyde found out in the episode I'm going to talk about today. So join me as I, SteamTeamRedubUK, CC Trainor-Ling, bring you another retro review from past seasons of The Loud House. Cue the intro! Today's episode is Exchange of Heart. In this episode, Clyde arranges for an exchange student to live at his house in an effort to divert the attention of his overprotective dads. We already had a similar McBride episode with Snow Way Down back in season 2, and the dynamic between Clyde and his dads in that episode is pretty much the same in this episode. Clyde wants to have more independence while Harold and Howard are way too overprotective and assume the worst case scenario if their son doesn't take the proper precautions when doing something that isn't even life-threatening. They have him using a seatbelt when he's sitting, ban him from watching scary movies, and immediately freak out over the idea of him eating something dangerous like hot sauce and pickles. Seriously, some guy from over 200 years ago died from choking on a pickle, giggity, and now he's never allowed to have one. However, I will give some credit to the joke at the end where Clyde was finally given permission to have a pickle, and it triggered a chain reaction that caused his dads to double over in pain, sort of reinforcing their earlier warning about how dangerous those things can be. Nonetheless, the way Clyde's dads went about being helicopter parents is what brought the episode down. While their behavior in season 2 was more exaggerated for comedic effect, their behavior in this episode wasn't even close to being funny. It was more forceful than anything. They learned to be more trusting of Clyde and vowed to stop treating him like a baby towards the end of Snow Way Down, but this episode practically erases that character development for the sake of storytelling. Seeing Clyde go through this kind of storyline a second time just doesn't hit the same way it did the first time. So in an effort to get his dads off his back, again, Clyde decides to host a Brazilian exchange student named Tiago so his dads can focus more of their time on the new kid so Clyde can have more freedom to do whatever he wants. It takes a little while, but eventually Howard and Harold start spending more time with the new kid. Clyde added how Tiago had been feeling homesick and could use some quality time with his dads. Even though Clyde's plan to get more independence finally worked, he noticed how his dads were paying more attention to Tiago and it looked as though he had to fend for himself. The turning point in Clyde's plan came when he assumed his dads really took his idea of going to Brazil to heart when he found the house completely empty and their suitcases were gone. However, it turned out they were just accompanying Tiago to the airport and they gave him his suitcase to fill with flippies, which will obviously melt by the time he gets home, but that's beside the point. They also reveal how Clyde wanted more freedom, hence why they weren't around as much to do what they would normally do for him, and show him security camera footage of him embracing his newfound freedom while they were gone. Even though I understand what the episode was going for regarding this camera revelation, I also found it rather disturbing how they installed surveillance in their house and Clyde never knew about it. This revelation took the idea of Clyde's dads being helicopter parents and cranked it up to a very uncomfortable level. I found it even more disturbing how Clyde was quick to forgive and forget the fact his dads practically invaded his privacy, something I don't think I need to explain in depth. I get how it's a cartoon and they would never dabble with the idea of Clyde doing anything crazy when his dads aren't home. You can let your imaginations figure out what that means. But hopefully you understand why I didn't particularly like this reveal. Plus, I noticed an inconsistency to their stance on Clyde being left home alone. They didn't appear to trust Clyde to look after the cats and called upon their cat sitter so Clyde could come with them to the park. Then they had no problem with him being home alone when they started spending quality time with Tiago and never mentioned their cat sitter in that instance. If they figured their son wanted more freedom and knew they had security cameras so they could keep an eye on him, then what was the purpose of calling their cat sitter the first time? Maybe they installed the cameras between their park outing and their one-on-one quality time with Tiago? Maybe I'm overthinking everything here, but this greatly conflicts with the ending to the episode Baby Steps where Clyde was allowed to look after the cats with no one else around. But either way, his dads loosen up by the end and we see Tiago take his leave, which brings me to this Brazilian exchange student. I don't really have too much to say about him because he barely did anything noteworthy. All we know is that he he loves Carnival, and he lied about returning home to Brazil to attend samba school. He just needed an excuse to get away from Clyde's dads. Which, going based on what he had to endure, I can see why he wanted to get the hell out of there. That's what makes Clyde's plan to get some alone time so strange. It worked out in his favor, and it worked out as a detriment to Tiago. Funny how things turn out, you know? Overall, there's really not a lot of good things I can say about this episode. It was just a more underwhelming version of Snow Way Down, and the story undid some very good character development for Clyde's dads by reverting them back to being extremely overprotective. I guess the only thing I can say in appreciation to Harold and Howard would be how they only act the way they do because they really love their son. They just don't want to see him get hurt, and that's what it means to be a good parent. Clyde had to once again fight for more freedom, and his plan did work out in the end, despite assuming his goal came at the cost of being neglected. The last two things worth mentioning were the little funny bits with the cats celebrating their killing of bunny slippers, and Lori looking like a sleep-deprived mess when Clyde needed a lift to the airport. I find it so weird how they had to bring in Catherine Tabor when they could have gotten any random person in the studio to record a bunch of incoherent noises. In short, this episode isn't anything to write home about unless you're a huge fan of Clyde and or his dads, and that's as nice a way of putting it as it can get. With that said, I give Exchange of Heart a 6.1 out of 10. Well folks, that concludes my review of Exchange of Heart. So I gotta ask, what did you guys think of this episode? Sound off in the comments below, and be sure to click that subscribe button for more Loud House related content. That's going to do it for me. I'll catch you guys for the next video, but until then, this is SteamTeamRedubUK, CC Trainor-Ling, signing off. Peace out, home slices.